Just a little bit of information about Many Faces. Many Faces is the collaboration of almost 30 local organizations. Our mission is simple but powerful: to strengthen communities by providing opportunities to listen, learn, reflect, and engage in conversations and actions that promote equity, diversity, and inclusion. Evenings like this are how we live out that mission together. The topic of immigration is deeply personal and highly political. But tonight we want to focus on gaining a better and deeper understanding of the topic and how it impacts people in our community. About 500,000 immigrants call Minnesota home. This is about 9% of our state's population and does not include children born in the U.S. to foreign-born parents. Estimates for the number of undocumented immigrants in Minnesota range from approximately 80,000 to 130,000. The data that I find amazing is that in the last school year, the Minnesota Department of Education recorded more than 300 different languages and dialects spoken in the homes of Minnesota students. Before we begin, I invite you to hold this space with care. Come with open hearts and minds. Listen to learn, not just to respond. Show respect for the stories and the experiences shared. And above all, let's work together to ensure that everyone feels safe and valued. With that, I would like to turn over the program to our facilitator for the evening, Jackie Reese.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, everyone, and another welcome. We are going to start tonight by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves, their name, their organization, and about how long they've been involved in immigration issues. And I'll start over here on the far end. Rick?
Okay, my name is Rick Story. I'm a Vadnais Heights resident. I am a member of Many Faces also, which is part of why I'm here. The reason I'm here is because I do sponsor, my wife and I and another couple sponsor a Ukrainian family on the Humanitarian Parole Program. So I am here as a community member and a person, not an expert, but a person that has that experience.
Good evening. My name is Corleen Smith. I work at International Institute of Minnesota. If you've gone to the State Fair, we're on Como Avenue, right across from the birthing center, actually. So you've actually gone through our parking lot, I'm sure. I'm the Director of Immigration Services, and I have been in this field for about 25 years. So I'm excited to talk with you tonight.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Andrew Hazard. I'm a reporter with Sahan Journal. We are a nonprofit news outlet that focuses on immigrants in Minnesota. I have been a journalist for about a dozen years, and the last 4 or 5 of them covering immigration off and on.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. I am John Choi, and I have the great honor and privilege to serve all of you as your elected Ramsey County attorney. I've been in this role since January of 2011. I live in St. Paul and Highland Park, and I am an immigrant to this country. I was born in Korea in 1970 and came here in 1973.
Hi, I'm Mai Mua. I'm an immigration attorney. I have a law firm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I have an associate that works with me and soon to be licensed attorney any day now. We primarily just do immigration law, and I've been practicing immigration law since 2007. I've been in the field since 2004.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Teresa Dykoschek. I am pro bono director at the Advocates for Human Rights in Minneapolis. We provide pro bono legal representation to people who are seeking asylum, who are victims of trafficking, who are unaccompanied kids, and who are in immigration detention. And we work on a variety of other human rights issues locally, nationally, and internationally.
And good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Calderon. I am also an immigration attorney. I've been working in immigration only for about 3 years and change. Prior to that, I was actually a social worker. I did a number of years with the Ramsey County Children's Mental Health and Hennepin County Child Protection, and worked with, as a Spanish-speaking social worker, the immigrant communities there for Spanish speakers. But now I practice immigration law.
Thank you. And I'm going to do something strange. As Lisa said, this is a panel of experts. They spend many, many hours each day, each week, working on some really difficult issues. So I'm going to ask you to give them a hand right now for being here. Thank you. All right, we're going to start our questions. I'm going to start with John Choi. John, the mission of the Ramsey County Attorney's Office is to serve Ramsey County residents by pursuing justice and public safety, protecting the vulnerable, delivering quality legal services, and providing leadership to achieve positive outcomes for our community. That's a really broad mission encompassing many categories. Could you describe for us when and where your work intersects with the immigration system?
So thank you for that question. So as your locally elected prosecutor who is in charge of our county attorney's office, and we do a whole bunch of things from prosecution to child protection to civil commitments, and providing corporation counsel for the county, and just a whole spectrum of things that we do. And we don't have any role in enforcing immigration laws. That's the federal government. We're at the local level. However, the role that I play as a prosecutor, as if there are incidents that occur in our community where somebody breaks the law and cases are submitted to my office for us to prosecute, we have the important job to make sure that we have enough evidence to be able to move forward in a criminal case. And then through that process, when you watch TV, you would think that every case in America is actually before a jury and there's a trial. We don't have enough judges or courtrooms to actually have trials in every case. In fact, we get 5,000 cases per year, and that's just only at the felony level. And so when we have to respond to those cases, oftentimes we actually have more of a plea bargaining system. So maybe 2% of all of the cases in America are going to be tried. The rest of them are a series of negotiations that happen between the prosecution and the defense. And so as we're thinking about what we need to do right by the person that was harmed or the victim of a crime. We need to ensure that there's some modicum of accountability, and we don't want the behavior to repeat itself. We also, in certain situations, we will seek some aspect of punishment, a sentence. So it could be a prison sentence, but in many of the cases, so put aside murder, put aside violent crime, but most of the cases that we get, the number one case that we get is felony theft, and some domestic violence cases, etc. So all of these cases, and they involve people who have been harmed, people who are accused of doing wrongdoing, and we will impose some sort of sanction. And oftentimes what that sanction is going to be is an actual conviction. And it will be maybe a probationary term of a certain time. You might have restitution, etc. But one of the things that we do in this country that we really need to be thinking about is that we have to stop punishing people after they have done everything that we have asked them to do. When they have made amends, right, to society, they finished their probation term, they finished their jail sentence, we have to stop punishing people. But we have this system of collateral consequences in this country where basically if you have a felony conviction on your record, you are subject to denied access to employment, housing. But one of the biggest collateral consequences in our society are those who are undocumented. And so that's the intersection that we have to think about that, to think about as we process those cases, to think about those collateral consequences of removal and deportation, and then thinking about also going backwards in time to adjust things so that people won't be removed from this country. So if you had a drug conviction, somebody who's here legally would get probation and a conviction. But if you are undocumented, or if you are here with a permanent status, you are subject to removal and deportation. So in 2018, one of the most important things that I have done as the county attorney is to actually hire an immigration attorney to work in our office to advise our prosecutors on how to mitigate in appropriate circumstances, not in all circumstances, but in appropriate circumstances, to mitigate those collateral consequences of potential removal from this country. And then in 2019, we enacted a policy in our office that requires every prosecutor to no longer say it's not my job, it's the defense's job to advocate for that. It's actually our job, because we are ministers of justice, to educate ourselves about the situation and then take appropriate action so that nobody is being punished unequally in the system. And so that's how we intersect with that. And since the enactment of that policy and the hiring of our immigration attorney, we have mitigated hundreds, we're talking about 300 or more people's convictions, so that they are not going to suffer that collateral consequence later down the road.
So I'm going to ask you another question. I'm going to ask you one more question, John. Earlier this year, you requested a ruling from the State Attorney General on whether a county can lawfully hold people in custody based on immigration detainers issued by federal authorities. Could you explain why you requested this ruling and what the legal opinion was?
So you never want to ask for an Attorney General's legal opinion unless you know what the answer is going to be, right? So back in about 2014, we issued a legal opinion to our sheriff, making it very clear that that our job is not the job of the federal government. So if they were to request that we hold somebody in our jail, they can do that, but the advice that we give to our sheriff in terms of upholding constitutional rights is that if they are not charged with a crime, so in other words, if somebody gets arrested, they get taken to the jail, we have 48 hours to make a charging decision, right? And if we don't make a decision within that 48 hours, or we decline the case because there's not enough evidence to prosecute, and they get a request from ICE to hold on to that person just for a little bit longer until we can get there, that's actually unconstitutional. You can't hold somebody in custody without formally charging them, and we have laws about how you go about doing that. So we issued that opinion in 2014, but there was a lot of things that were changing, and I knew that other counties in the state of Minnesota weren't necessarily abiding by that, so we wanted to make it clear for the entire state. So I asked the Attorney General I gave him the question about this situation, and he agreed with our legal decision back in 2014. So now that applies to everybody in the state. And so if somebody in Crow Wing County decides to ignore that, they're jeopardizing taxpayer dollars, because they could be sued and not have the benefit of qualified immunity because they would be ignoring our Attorney General's legal opinion that you can't do that. So hopefully that protects individuals in those situations, because the local government, the jailer, should not be holding people for the purpose of helping the federal government in their ICE or their immigration enforcement.
Let's move to Daniel. Let me remind you that you have the cards on your table. If you want to write down questions as you think of them, we'll have some time later to ask questions of some of the panelists. Daniel, a recent Supreme Court decision allows the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement ICE agency to profile Americans based on perceptions that they look like an immigrant. Specifically, the Supreme Court decision allows ICE to use the following criteria when making investigative stops: the type of location at which they were found, the type of job they appeared to work, whether they speak Spanish or English with an accent, and their apparent race or ethnicity. Could you tell us a little bit about what you see as the ramifications of that ruling, especially for Latino Americans and Latino immigrants?
Yes, that ruling just brings a lot of fear and uncertainty to the Latino community. So I am the child of immigrants. I have a lot of Latino family in California. It's just a habit now to basically carry our papers. They carry passports, evidence of citizenship, understanding that because of how they look, they're fair game for Immigration and Customs Enforcement at this point. I believe Sotomayor noted that this risks making Latinos essentially second-class citizens that are susceptible to detention by federal officers because they look Latino. It also suggests that looking Latino is not looking American, which I have a big problem with. It does suggest to the Latino community that they are not accepted as Americans because of how they look. It instills a fair degree of fear. I believe it is directly linked to ICE having detained, I believe the number at this point is about 170 citizens, many residents. So ICE is detaining citizens. There was even one citizen who they detained twice. So it's instilled a lot of fear and really made it uncomfortable to move around the country without having our papers for the Latino community to present to federal officers if they want to inspect whether we belong here. So really destructive to American society generally, in my opinion.
You know, we have been so fortunate in having people from so many different countries join us as Americans. Many people were surprised to learn that some Hmong Minnesotans were being detained and deported. Could you talk about why this has happened and the reactions in the Hmong community, and what is being done to reduce the fear of deportation in the community?
Thank you, Jackie. So, as a matter of background, a lot of the Hmong folks came to the U.S. as refugees. During the Vietnam War, the Hmong people were used to infiltrate the Ho Chi Minh Trail because it ran from North Vietnam to South Vietnam, running through Cambodia and through Laos. A lot of the Hmong folks are from Laos. And so we're essentially a minority group in Laos, and then there are folks in China as well as in Vietnam. But the Hmong folks were used to infiltrate the Ho Chi Minh Trail to rescue downed pilots, to do basically whatever the Americans wanted us to do. And so then after the fall of Saigon to communism, and basically with communism going through Southeast Asia, the Hmong people started getting persecuted, and so a lot of them fled into Thailand, and then subsequently many ended up in the United States. And so the Hmong folks didn't start coming to the US until 1975, and there have been different waves that have been here in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s, and in the early 2000s. And so a lot of the folks that are getting removed now are folks that came as refugees. And so there are also a lot of folks that were never born in Laos, that were born in a refugee camp in Thailand, just like I was. But these folks, because their parents are from Laos, they are then considered citizens of Laos. And so it's the same for folks that are Cambodian and folks that are Vietnamese. There's essentially, even if they were born in a refugee camp, they're not a citizen of that country, but a citizen of their parents' country. And so folks are now getting deported because for a very long time, Laos was not accepting deportees, and so then they weren't able to effectuate the removal. And so then folks with criminal convictions are then put into removal proceedings, and they just sign a deportation order because they know that the government is not able to deport them. What has changed, though, is that now they are able to deport because Laos is being forced to essentially accept individuals, even if they've never been to Laos, even if they don't speak the language, but they are now able to deport folks. And so a lot of folks in the community are getting rounded up because these folks already have a final order of removal. And so what we've been trying to do with the community is educating folks is if you have a final order of removal, you should try to at least get a copy of your immigration file so we can look at whether or not there's anything that we can do to reopen that removal proceedings. And then for folks that have removable offenses, we are working with them on what we can do to either try not to put them into removal proceedings or find ways to kind of mitigate that. But essentially, it's something that has been hit hard in the community because it wasn't something that has happened in the past. And so, because now that folks are able to be removed, everyone is scared, and the fear in the Latino community is the same in the Hmong community, because we have the folks that they believe that if they're here, they can be removed at any time without realizing that they still have to go through the proper channels. If someone is here, they still need to be put into removal proceedings if they don't have an order of removal already. But the fear in the community, especially, is for those that already have an order of removal. And sometimes when you see what's happening on the news, they make it seem like, oh, this just happened, like we've rounded up all these criminals. But in the Hmong community, that a lot of those criminals have convictions that are 20 years old, that are, well over 15 years old. And so these are, a lot of them are old crimes. And the crimes that we look at, that we go through the different prosecutor's office, or we're working on pardons for, are crimes that are essentially very, very old.
So fear is definitely a theme, isn't it? Teresa, could you talk to us a little bit about immigration court? What should a person expect when they go to immigration court in Minnesota for the first time, or if they're going for a pending asylum case? What's the experience like for them? And particularly, how has this changed in 2025? And can they have an attorney with them?
Thank you for those questions. I haven't always been an immigration attorney. It has been just within the last handful of years that I've started providing pro bono representation, deferring and asking a lot of questions of my colleagues at the Advocates for Human Rights as I'm starting to take on these cases. So I still am learning, and I'm still surprised by our immigration system. And some of the things that surprised me that might not come as a surprise to those of you who attended the last session, our immigration courts are not courts that are under our judicial branch. They are administrative law courts. They are under the executive branch, under the Department of Justice. Unlike our criminal courts, if you cannot afford to have an attorney, you do not have the right to have a court-appointed attorney. 62% of people at our Fort Snelling Immigration Court go to court unrepresented. And when you think about if you were going to court, how nervous would you be? And that is a circumstance where you probably speak the language. You might have access to friends or family members who might be able to help you navigate. You might be able to do some research on your own. You don't need interpretation in order to speak with the judge. And it also isn't a situation where you might be seeking asylum because you faced persecution in your country of origin. So when people go to immigration court, it can be very intimidating, and they do not have the right to a court-appointed attorney. Many people do not have attorneys in this process. There are typically two types of hearings: master calendar hearings, which are the first hearings that people would experience, and individual hearings, and that basically is the trial where the individual is putting on their evidence for the relief that they are seeking. Things have changed in 2025. People are going to court. They are going to their hearings. They are showing up for their master calendar hearings. But starting across the country earlier this year, and this started happening in Minnesota at our Fort Snelling court at the end of May, the government started to move to dismiss people's cases. Normally that would be a good thing, that the government was no longer seeking to remove you from this country, but what would happen is people would leave and they would be taken into immigration custody. We're also seeing that people who have filed applications for relief, like asylum, that their cases are being what's called pretermitted, where they're not given the opportunity to present their case, to present their evidence. So things have been changing, and it's been happening on an ongoing basis at our court. One of the projects that we have at the Advocates is immigration court monitoring volunteers, and so people are at the immigration court and they're seeing what is happening regularly and tracking that information.
Thank you, Teresa. Now I'll turn to Rick. You have a unique perspective as part of a group of people in Minnesota and North Dakota and other places in the United States who have agreed to sponsor Ukrainian families who arrived here starting in 2022. Could you explain the difference between humanitarian parole and temporary protected status, or TPS, initials that we hear sometimes? Which countries are affected by these statuses, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of them?
I'm going to first talk about what I do, and there's 5 other people in this room who are also sponsors of Ukrainian families that I can see. So in 2022, the war with Ukraine started. There is a displacement of Ukrainian citizens, especially from the Donbass, Mariupol region of Ukraine. They were displaced, and a lot of them migrated into to Europe or other places. this is an executive run program, and it's been in place since 1952, but it's always been executive orders that have run this. So President Biden decided that they could qualify for a program where we could bring people from Ukraine or from Europe or from wherever they've been displaced to into our country and provide them a safe place to live and work and be legal while they're trying to navigate that situation back home. It's not a permanent situation. It's good for 2 years. We are vetted as sponsors financially and legally. They are vetted as people that have a need to come to our country. We bring them in, we help them get situated, set up. They're expedited into a social security system. They get a work permit. They get the right to live here for 2 years, and that's what we've done. So that's bringing people from another country into our country with authority of the U.S. government. So TPS is for people who are already in this country. So for Ukraine, if people were here on a student visa or some other category and the war started and it's not safe for them to go back, they can apply for TPS, which allows them similar and almost enhanced protections over the humanitarian parole program. And the humanitarian parole people who are here can also get a secondary status of legal residency through that TPS program, so they can have both. So that's basically the gist of that. In the last administration, there were 6 countries that had humanitarian parole: Ukraine, Afghanistan, and then Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. All had those humanitarian parole and TPS authorizations for people to live here while they had conflicts or humanitarian issues in their country that they couldn't go back to. Now here's one of the dilemmas is humanitarian parole then has to get reauthorized after 2 years. The war is still going on. That process was just kind of clicking along. They'd get authorized for another 2 years. TPS is based on a dedicated time that it ends. So TPS, you apply for that. When it ends, and then they have to decide if you're going to reauthorize that through but they're similar but different in that the dates are not the same. Everything was fairly consistent until, since it's an executive order, a change of administration, those things can change because that's where it comes from. The current president and Department of Homeland Security is not as welcoming. They basically immediately tried to disband and cancel all those programs. It's been in the courts for many months. I'm going to go to the end of that. The Ukrainians are the most fortunate of those 6 groups. If they paused the application, so the people who are trying to get re-parole, their time ran out. They are now living in our country without authorization or the right to work. So many thousands of them have lost jobs and their ability to support themselves. But the process has been restarted based on court decisions in May. It is going on, and it's kind of a random assortment of people who are getting notices that they're approved, but it's still going on, and there's still a possibility that they will get renewed for that parole or for TPS. The other countries are not so fortunate. Afghanistan can still get re-parole on a very individualized basis. TPS is canceled. For the other CHNV nations, it's all canceled. So that's kind of where they sit. So those people are facing a future without legal authority to be in the country.
Thank you, Rick. So it sounds to me that there's a lot of people who can't stay and can't leave. Is that right? Kind of a conundrum. Let's move to Corleen. Corleen, the International Institute is known for the services you provide to immigrants, including citizenship classes. Could you talk about the steps to citizenship and about recent changes that could make that path more difficult? You might also talk about the fact that you were once, until recently, a primary resource for refugees. Could you explain how that has changed also?
Yes, thank you. So the work at International Institute, it's actually very helpful to have that previous answer because it kind of ties in talking about different status and how different community members essentially are living here in Minnesota. The work of International Institute, we are a refugee resettlement agency, which essentially means that we are welcoming refugees into the country and helping them in their first 90 days after they arrive. That process has been suspended with an executive order that happened in January. So currently there is no real refugees that are entering the country essentially under that refugee status. Usually what happens every year, there is the president in consultation with the Congress is deciding what the refugee number essentially is going to be and how many refugees are going to be allowed into the country. That so far has not happened for this new year, and we're waiting to see if it's going to happen. So that's kind of on hold for the moment, essentially. The work of International Institute does continue. We have a variety of other programs, one of which is helping folks with citizenship. And citizenship is for someone that has permanent status. They have a green card, different than a parolee, different than someone that has TPS. So they've got this green card, they're eligible to work and live in Minnesota. Typically, people that are green card holders and are applying for citizenship, most of them, not all, but most have been in the U.S. living here for 5 years. They have to complete an application for citizenship. There's a payment that occurs. You have background checks. People are going through a background check to make sure that they qualify for citizenship. Based on a variety of things like good moral character, as it's called, also simple, maybe not simple things, but things such as paying taxes, making sure that you're paying your child support, a variety of different things that you're having to prove when you're applying for citizenship. Recently, a lot of that has changed. As you've kind of heard the theme tonight, I would say it's making it more complicated, more confusing. One thing, for example, is you may have heard of the history and government questions that you have to study for citizenship. In the past, it was 100 questions. You would have to, they would ask you 10, and you would have to have 6 correct. Now they've increased that, so it's 120 questions, and now you have to answer more questions essentially to pass the test. In addition to that, they've started, the Immigration Services has started doing what's called kind of like a neighborhood check or a home visit. So they could potentially show up at your home unexpected and ask questions related to your citizenship application. Making sure that, what's a variety of things, but essentially making sure that the information that you're giving on the application is correct and verifying a lot of your immigration history. So that's put a lot of fear and uncertainty into our clients, having that unexpected visit or phone call from immigration. That can be very unsettling, I would say. There's more scrutiny to the process. In addition to, having the background check, they are also looking for not just an absence of maybe something negative or like a police issue, but also what are the good things that you are doing in your community. So just having to do that kind of additional paperwork and additional proof to immigration is really putting more of a burden on the process and really making the process, again, become more complex and taking much longer than it has in the past. And it also appears that the application is going to be changing as well. They're going to be asking more questions about potentially what are your social media posts, what are you posting online, and what kinds of information are you, sharing about your beliefs on social media. And then another small thing that's changing with the process, which most of us probably don't really think about too much, but how the fee is being paid. There is a fee for citizenship. You have to pay, it's around $760, and that's a payment that goes to immigration. And immigration is actually covered by those fees. So although there is a government shutdown, immigration is still working and processing forms. So in the past, you could pay maybe with a check or a money order, and now they're only accepting credit cards or basically banking transfers, essentially. So that makes it more difficult as well if we have folks that are unbanked, essentially, and having that money order was very helpful because you could plan your finances to make it much more easy. And now having that credit card payment is also something that's having to do a little bit more planning with your finances. Is just another additional burden. So we continue to address these issues with our clients. Each year we help around 800 people with citizenship. So that's part of our work, is really making sure that despite all of these negative things that are happening, kind of these extra scrutiny that's happening, that we can still continue to support our clients and help them through this process.
Corleen. I would just add to that on the idea of citizenship and naturalization and change. For years, the League of Women Voters, of which I am a member, has gone to naturalization ceremonies and registered new citizens to vote. That's been an important part of the things that we do. An executive order recently came through that disallows that to happen anymore. However, it only disallows it for administrative naturalization ceremonies. Fortunately, in Minnesota, we do judicial naturalization ceremonies, so the judicial ones can still go on. So here in Minnesota, we will still be able to do that registering to vote of new citizens. I've done it several times, and it's just an amazing experience to do. Okay, let's move on to Andrew, I believe. If I can change my page here. Andrew. The Sahan Journal, as you said, is dedicated to telling stories about Minnesota's immigrants and communities of color. Many of those stories are not seen in mainstream media. How do you find your stories? Since today's environment makes many feel vulnerable, how do you ensure that the individuals profiled in your stories feel safe in telling their stories and recognizing that they will be publicized? And also, as a reporter seeking these stories, do you feel threatened at all as you work to uncover and tell those stories?
Well, thank you for those questions. So Sahan Journal, we started in 2019, and our founder, publisher, my editor, his name was Mukhtar Ibrahim, and Mukhtar came to this country as a Somali refugee when he was a teenager. He graduated from St. Paul Central High School, went to the U of M, became a reporter. And one thing that he noticed is that his editors would come to him when, something terrible was happening in the Somali community, some kids getting in trouble or, some sort of scandal or whatever. And that's when they would go into those places. And I think the same held true for various ethnic groups that we, are home to here in the state. And Mukhtar wanted to try something different, where we focused on those communities and just kind of covered them like you'd cover anyone else, just capturing their real lives, capturing their successes, capturing their, low points, capturing trends, struggles that people have in their ordinary day-to-day lives. And so for us at Sahan, one of the ways that we find our stories is just by showing up on a consistent basis, whether it's someone opening a new business, some people, exploring a new space in their neighborhood, and writing about that, and also writing about the negatives that come along for any community. But I think by just being there and being intentional and letting people know that we do want to hear your stories, we don't just want to be here for the bad times, that's enabled us to continue reporting on these communities and to keep finding new communities. Obviously, as it's been touched upon here, in the immediate term, there are no new communities coming in because they're not really letting anyone new come in. But up until recently, we've had a lot of people come from places like, well, we're under humanitarian parole or TPS, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Ecuador, not TPS or humanitarian parole for there, but a lot of people coming from these places and just trying to highlight them, find out more about them. Where are they working? What are they doing? You know, how are they navigating life in this new place? And so for us, it's really just about showing up and being persistent and letting people know that we just want to tell your stories and explore what's going on. Now, to your point, there is a reticence right now, an understandable reticence for a lot of people about being in the news, and you should always kind of be hesitant about being in the news. I shouldn't tell you, but it's not always a great thing, and if there's anything looming over you, whether that's a pending case at immigration court or whatever, I can understand not necessarily wanting to talk to a reporter. We've had a long-standing policy at Sahan of if someone is undocumented and we want to write about what's going on in their lives, we will work with them to say, hey, we'll just refer to you as your first name, which is, a big journalistic question. We always want to be identifying people and verifying who they are, but in the story, maybe we'll say, hey, we'll just refer to you as your first name, or hey, we'll take a photo of you, but maybe you'll be kind of hunched over here, and we won't get a great look at your face, or not using as specific identifying information about where people live, maybe just leaving it at a city, or if they're in a big city saying the east side of St. Paul or the north side of Minneapolis, leaving it sort of vague in that sense. So we don't want to end up in a situation, I don't know how much they read over at DHS, but I don't want to end up in a situation where anything that we write about results in a negative outcome for somebody. And that's a super important part to us, and it's a super important part of building that trust that keeps people coming back and willing to tell us their stories. So that has been a unique thing to navigate in these circumstances. Just the other day, I was out in Columbia Heights in Northeast talking to a lot of people in the Ecuadorian community. We have a now quite large Ecuadorian community here in Minnesota, and kind of stereotypically concentrated in those areas of the state. And a lot of those people, they're not undocumented, they're not quote unquote illegal, they are going through a process, but that process has become more and more difficult, and then they technically could find themselves being held and detained if they're picked up in ICE activity at a job site or something like that. So just working with people and saying, okay, we'll just use your first name, or something like that, that's a big help for people. As for me as a reporter, I do not really feel in danger at all. For us, it's not about us. It's about what's happening in the community, and to the extent that yes, we have seen certainly more chilling effects out of this administration than in the recent past. That I don't think it's at a point where we're under direct threat or anything like that. Sometimes you got to keep your wits about you a little bit, but we do have a very strong First Amendment here in this country, so we're riding on that.
And for those of you who don't know, the Sahan Journal is an online newsletter, correct? And nonprofit, right? Yeah. Check it out. I'm just looking at the time. I think we'll maybe move on to a couple of questions and then take a quick break after a question, if that's okay. Let's have a short conversation about due process. That comes up a lot. What is it? What are some examples where people are being deprived of due process? I'm going to ask which of you would like to take that question? Due process. Don't be shy. All you attorneys over here. Somebody's got to do it. I can't do it. Oh, good. A non-attorney's.
This is what you all came here from. Legal advice from a non-lawyer. So due process does exist in immigration court, but as someone I believe has pointed out here, immigration court is not real court. Immigration court, the Executive Office of Immigration Review is a branch of DOJ. The judges, it's not the same as a federal judge who's just entrenched, like, they're an institution once you become a federal judge. It's not the same for immigration judges. Immigration judges are following directives that are being handed down from Washington, right? And so one of the things that we are reporting about at Sahan Journal is that there has been an eroding of due process for a lot of people who are going through the immigration system. And oftentimes this will appear in different ways, but you'll see an increase in what's known as expedited removal. So technically, if you've been in the country for less than 2 years under the U.S. system, they can move to expedite your removal, which is to say you're not actually going to get to go through this legal process. We're just going to send you back at our earliest convenience. And this has been used off and on for many years, but under the Trump administration, they are really broadly applying the standard. And so there's a lot of people who maybe they are going through a legal process before the court, and they're showing up at Fort Snelling to have a normal hearing for that process, and DHS will move to expedite that removal, and the judges often will grant that, and that's when you see people unexpectedly being pulled into detention. And so that's a real problem right now with due process or lack thereof. And then just broadly speaking, the increased use of detention by DHS is, I think, a further erosion of traditional due process that we've seen. So people who are just being held in the various jails that have agreements with ICE, even if there's really no, criminal or, reason to believe that they are flight risk or anything like that, that they'll just kind of prolong that detainment. And that is another example of, due process being eroded. And now I'll let an actual legal expert talk to you about this, maybe.
So I'll expand on that a little bit, and first I'll make a note of kind of what the implications are of these being not judicial courts but administrative courts. With that being the case, so the Board of Immigration Appeals is an administrative court, and they respond directly to the Attorney General. So that means that when cases go up on appeal to the Board of Immigration Appeals, the Attorney General can just pluck a case out and direct it to them and issue a decision on that. So that results in a lot of immigration law flip-flopping across generations. So I'm sure any immigration attorney is familiar with, for example, a series of cases called LEA cases, matter of LEA, that came out under the Obama administration, and then Trump took the first LEA case that said you could qualify for asylum based on being part of a family that was being persecuted. And then the Trump administration and Sessions at the time took LEA and said, nope, that doesn't work. And then Biden came in, and the Attorney General took that case again and said, actually, yes, it does. And then Trump 2.0 came back, and the Attorney General took that case again and said, actually, no, it doesn't. And so kind of just where you land, where your case lands, can really shift how your asylum application in particular with those cases is going to be processed. And then with regards to the expedited removal, that has been, that used to be something that would apply typically within, I believe it's 100 miles of the border. I don't typically have to deal with that here in Minnesota. But some new case law expanded that to treat all immigrants all immigrants who didn't enter with a visa or as a resident as applicants for admission, and extended expedited removal. So that's why it's now hitting our clients here, and that's what's happening when DHS dismisses a case. So I have a case now, which is why that's exactly on this point, of a person from Venezuela stabbed by law enforcement when he was working at a polling booth, beaten by police officers, seeking asylum. It's a good asylum case, who had his case before the immigration judge, and then DHS dismissed that case and took him directly into custody, because once they close his case in immigration court, the immigration judge no longer has jurisdiction, and now expedited removal applies, and now he can't get his asylum application heard. So to me, and it's an ongoing fight, we're in the middle of it right now, to try to get his case back before an immigration judge. So that's how they're kind of playing these games with changes in administrative interpretation, I'll say, of these laws that really complicate a person's ability to have their asylum application processed before a judge. So that's a case that I'm dealing with right now, and I just wanted to give you guys an example of what the kind of legal theory is behind why it's so potent for DHS now to have this new tool of just closing your case in immigration court, and in my opinion, violating your due process right to have your asylum application adjudicated by a judge and actually heard.
Anybody else? Teresa.
Building on the examples we've talked about, the dismissals by DHS, the pretermission, the example that I gave before, where people aren't given the opportunity to have their case heard, to present their application to the immigration court. But we're also seeing dismissals at the asylum office. So people who may have had expedited removal orders entered when they arrived to the United States, they followed the process, they applied for asylum. Now USCIS is saying, oh no, we're dismissing your case because you have this order that's in place, and so we're not going to hear that application either. Also, things that have happened when we talk about the dismissals, what if you want to appeal that dismissal? You could appeal to the Board of Immigration Appeals. If that's going to cost you more than $1,000 now. On an annual basis, if you are seeking asylum, you have to pay $1,000 to apply for asylum, and you have to pay $100 to apply for asylum, and $100 every year that your application is pending. If you would like to work in the United States and you have an application pending for asylum, you now need to pay $550 in order to ask to have work authorization. So there are things that are being put into place in order to discourage people from staying and actually being able to participate in the process. The opportunities are being taken away to present their cases, and there are fees that are being added in order to deter people from continuing on with the process that is currently in place.
Anybody over here?
Yeah.
If I could say one more thing about that. Another way that we're seeing cases lost with the mandatory detention scheme that we have in place now is, especially if a case goes up on appeal, those BIA appeals can take 3, 4, 5 years. And if you are subject to mandatory detention, that means you're going to be in detention for 3 or 4 or 5 years until your case is decided. And even if you're just waiting for a hearing before an immigration judge, if you're in custody, it goes a little bit faster, but you're still probably looking at several months. And then if you have the concern of losing your case and having to appeal it, then you're looking at several years. So I've seen quite a few people essentially tap out and just say, you know what, I'll take my chances, because maybe I'll survive, but at least I won't be in custody for 5 years with no legal recourse, no way of getting out. And especially in cases where the person in custody is the primary breadwinner, it's $1,000 to file the appeal, but then you have to pay an attorney probably. So then probably another couple $1,000s. So it's incredibly difficult, and it leads to a lot of people, in my experience, just withdrawing their application because they can't tolerate being away from their family for probably years until hopefully they get a favorable decision.
Thank you all. There's a couple of questions we have regarding kids and children and different situations for kids and children that we'd like to ask you. So panelists, be prepared to raise your hand here. What has been the approach to unaccompanied, undocumented children, and have there been recent changes to how the immigration system treats these kids? Unaccompanied, undocumented children.
I turned the mic off. Is it back on? Okay. Recent changes. So one of the forms of relief that is available if you are someone who has experienced abuse, abandonment, or neglect by one or both of your parents in your country of origin, you can apply for special immigrant juvenile status. Until June, when someone would apply for special immigrant juvenile status and it was approved by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, they would typically automatically grant 4 years of deferred action, which would mean that we're not going to do anything to enforce removal. We're going to defer any action to remove you from this country. USCIS stopped doing that in June. And so kids, young adults, people who are under the age of 21, who have a court order from our Minnesota state courts that said, yes, you experienced abuse, abandonment, or neglect by one or both of your parents. It's not in your best interest to return to your country of origin or of last habitual residence. They have that order with those findings, and now they could still be moving forward in removal proceedings and could be removed from the United States.
Rick.
I have a slight addition to that. For people who are here on temporary basis and they have children and they lose those every month, there's 10,000 Ukrainians who are losing their authority to be here and to work. So at some point in time, there's a risk that they could be deported for some reason. If they have a family, our sponsorship group, there's about 50 of us, and we talk every week and almost every day. One of the things we've done, unfortunately, is filled out DOPA forms, which is Designation of Parental Authority. That means if the parents are taken because they don't have legal right to be here or work anymore, I am given responsibility for the child in our family to take her with me while that gets sorted out and we can reunite them at some point in time. We do not want the children in detention. So one of the things we do is think about that and prepare for that, and that's one of the unfortunate outcomes. One of the things that you might notice on your table they're called red cards, and everybody should have Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights for illegal search and seizure. Now, without a signed court order, the federal people are not allowed to enter your residence, but that hasn't stopped them unless you stop them. And that's kind of what that details. All of our people are counseled on that. They know those. It doesn't mean that they won't be taken someday. And the outcome of that is we do not want children going to detention. Simple as that.
Let's also talk about children who were born in the United States whose parents are undocumented. What is their status today? This is not children who were brought to the United States by their parents, but children who were born here, birthright citizenship. Mike?
So anybody that is born on U.S. soil, unless they're children of diplomats, they're U.S. citizens. And so in the U.S. at this time, we have birthright citizenship, meaning if you were born here, you're a U.S. citizen, whether your parents are documented or undocumented, as long as they're not diplomats. Under President Trump, there was an executive order that was trying to strip that away. And so right now it's being litigated. There is currently an injunction on that. And so kids that are born here are still considered U.S. citizens.
And then what about the deferred action for childhood arrivals, the DACA? I understand Minnesota had about 4,200 young people who were deferred action for childhood DACA. Any comments on their status?
So DACA is not permanent legal status, and it does not provide a pathway to citizenship. So it's similar to, DACA in and of itself doesn't provide a pathway to citizenship. So it's kind of a temporary, long-standing relief, similar to the deferred action that we referenced earlier with SIJ, where it's essentially an acknowledgement. Technically, you could be removed, but because of this policy, we will not enforce our removal authority on you at this point. So it allows people with DACA to get a work permit and apply for work authorization, work, pay their taxes, have a social security card. It does not make them a resident. It doesn't give them the right to vote. It doesn't give them any of those other things, just the right to be here without enforcement action and work and pay their taxes. There was a lot of litigation going on out of Texas with regards to DACA. So up to this point, they're not accepting new applications, but they're continuing to renew applications or standing grants of DACA.
Daniel, sounds like another situation of uncertainty in people's lives. I'll ask one more question before we move on, and that is, we've talked about being in court and all the things going through. I understand some people have attorneys, some people don't have attorneys. And And I've read that there's studies that show there's a significant difference in outcome if you have an attorney or don't have an attorney. So let's just talk for a minute about how people are accessing attorneys. What are people doing who cannot access an attorney to take them through the process? Teresa, I'm probably going to turn to you.
So as I mentioned before, about 62% of people who are in our Fort Snelling Immigration Court, this was a statistic from January of 2024, 62% of people in Fort Snelling did not have attorneys. We at the Advocates for Human Rights, we provide pro bono legal representation. Volunteers that work with us provide direct pro bono legal representation to people who are seeking asylum. And so that 38% of people who do have representation in immigration court, they may have attorneys that they've hired, they may be working with a pro bono volunteer attorney, but those are volunteers. And as a nonprofit organization, we also have limited resources and need to make sure that the volunteers receive training and the support that they need in order to be able to represent individuals. And so we do not, even if every attorney in the state of Minnesota raised their hand and said, yes, I would like to volunteer to provide assistance, we still would not be able to meet the need. And so a lot of people are proceeding pro se. They're trying to navigate a very complicated system on their own, with laws that are and regulations that are complex and difficult to understand for attorneys that have been navigating the system for a long time, in addition to all of the changes that are happening, and in addition to thinking about it in a different language, and also needing to present very personal details of your life. If you are seeking a form of relief where you're describing the persecution that you experienced in your home country, and you are describing very horrific things that have happened to you in a court of law, in a court, it's very difficult to navigate, especially on your own. And so having an attorney, I think the statistic is that you're 8 to 10 times more likely to be granted relief if you have an attorney with your immigration court case.
Just one thing to add to that, which is that there are a lot of people who, when they're going through the immigration court process, they're going to start that process usually with, and I believe Daniel said this earlier, a lot of them are going to start with these like master calendar hearings. And when people go in for these master calendar hearings, the judge is basically checking in more or less on a group of 20 to 30 people at a time. Families come in through that sort of thing. The overwhelming majority of people in these master calendar hearings have no legal representation at all. It's very rare to have it at that point in the process. Now, people might, as they get closer to, putting in an asylum application or an application for a specific visa, at that point, maybe they'll cobble enough money together to pay an attorney to help them through those individual hearings. But a lot of people, even if they do ultimately get representation, are at least experiencing part of this system without representation. And they're going through a system where you're talking through an interpreter. If they speak Spanish, there'll probably be someone in the courthouse doing that in person. If not, it's on Zoom or what have you, right? That they're getting this interpretation, and they're being told, okay, well, you should go back and submit these forms. And it all happens very, very fast, like faster than you checking in at DVS to renew your license tabs, in terms of, okay, so you got to do this next, for next time, have this, fill this form out, like find a friend who speaks English who can help you fill out this form. And people are, I just go and observe these hearings, a couple times a week, and people just kind of nod. It's really unclear how much stuff is getting through to people and that sort of thing. So I think it's an important thing to note. Even if people do get representation, they're usually going through at least part of the process on their own.
All right, I know I've seen a lot of people with cards. Lisa is on this side of the room. Tim is on this side of the room.
Okay, we're going to start over here with the question.
I would like to know some of the ways that we can get involved and some of the ways that we can help immigrants.
How many people have that question? All right, we're probably going to have all of you answer that. How can people get involved? How can they help? That was the main question that came out of our first session. And look at the hands that were raised. Who would like to start us off?
I'm just thinking right now about food support. Many of our clients are receiving food support, and you might know that beginning in November, food support is not going to be available. And so anything you can do to think about supporting a local food shelf or a little pantry in your neighborhood, that's an easy thing, I think.
Daniel? Teresa?
If you know anyone who is recently arrived or who may be in immigration proceedings or may be in immigration proceedings, it would be helpful to encourage them to speak to an attorney sooner rather than later, because I don't know how many clients come through my door when it's just a day or two too late, and there's at that point nothing I can do for them. A lot of immigration applications can be very time sensitive. So for example, we were mentioning a lot the special immigrant juvenile visa. Once it's your 21st birthday, you don't qualify anymore. And so a lot of people have come into my office when they're 22. And I look at their history, and if you had talked to me 2 years ago, you could have a visa today, or at least have a pending visa today. Asylum, a lot of people don't realize that you have to apply for asylum within 1 year of your arrival in the United States. Otherwise, it's generally time barred. So a lot of people come through who could have good asylum claims, but they got to the United States seeking asylum. They're in survival mode. They don't have thousands of dollars. They don't have a car. They don't have even knowledge of where to find an attorney, much less that they have to file their application within 1 year. And so encouraging people to just consult with an attorney as soon as possible, so that if they have any options, they don't get to someone who can find that when it's already too late.
They say, I don't have any money to go to an attorney.
Can you give it to them? Then that would be that would be helpful. Yeah. Teresa can speak more to the pro bono side of things. I work in a for-profit firm, so the funding is also just a major obstacle. Some of these cases can take years. To pay an attorney for years is really difficult if you're a recent arrival in this country. So yes, funding is a big obstacle. I've seen clients get funds together through churches, through community groups, through families and stuff like that to pay for immigration proceedings, or pro bono representation if you can find it. Yes.
I had two things to add. One thing that you can do is you're already doing it. You're here and you're learning about what is currently happening with our immigrant communities and what is currently happening with our law. And so it's being here and then also talking about it with other people and sharing the information, things that you learned tonight. Then the second thing that I would like to suggest is volunteer. If you speak another language, we have volunteer interpretation and translation opportunities. We have our immigration court observation project, and I'm sure that there are other volunteer opportunities with other nonprofit organizations that are in the Twin Cities area as well.
Volunteering opportunities, specific to immigration and our families. Well, that's a good question. The one thing I want to actually address before that is there's a kindness that I'd like to show to people, and an interest in immigrant communities who are here, and that kindness goes a long way. Our Ukrainian families we're increasingly talking about how do we support them when they can't work, and that's happening to all of these communities. So we're already starting to do fundraisers within that community. Those fundraisers go to help support these families who can't work and can't support themselves as they're waiting for some process to play out. There's going to be increasing need for that as we move forward. It's a hard thing to actually watch and see because there's a fear out there. I'm going to be really honest with what Daniel started out with. Our Ukrainians can become invisible easier than other communities can because they're white. If they were one of the other categories, they really can struggle in our communities because they're visible to us in a way that most of us don't understand. And that fear is palpable. even within our community, there's people who, as they lose authority, we're talking today about, they don't want to leave their home because they're afraid to go out into the community because they have that fear of being without, while they're waiting for something to happen, they're just waiting, and there's not much they can do. So you will see opportunities more than I can offer them to you to support the communities, and they're going to need food, they're going to need money, they're going to need a place to live. And all the communities are going to need that. And I don't have a specific place where I'd plug people into, but the food shelf is going to be overwhelmed fairly soon, and there's just an ongoing need for supporting people who came here and are working and supporting themselves, and all of a sudden, in one day, they lose that ability to support themselves. That's just that's a difficult place to be. So that's all.
Let me turn the question back over out here. Any suggestions any of you want to make?
I don't know if that, I just wanted more information about the immigration. Where do you go to start on the immigration monitoring? If we're interested, who do we contact? You know, where do we go?
We have information on our website at theadvocatesforhumanrights.org. Theadvocatesforhumanrights.org.
There's many different places where you can do some volunteering. There's organizations you can support with funding who are working on the system out there and helping with providing attorneys, many different ways to do that. Lisa, I'm going to go ahead and mention, you can also do some advocacy. Before you leave, on the back table is a sheet of paper that was prepared for the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis program that they had on immigration. And it lists all sorts of activities that you can do at the federal level, state level, local level, different kinds of things. Most of them relate to bills, contacting elected officials, getting laws changed. Some of this is very difficult to do in the current environment, but we shouldn't give up and should thank those who are already working on things like that.
The one thing we've tried in our community is constantly communicating to our elected officials. We're sitting in the middle of a supportive environment of elected officials, and what we found actually is that there's not a lot of ability for our senators and representatives to have much influence over the Department of Human Services, or the Kristi Noem and her organization haven't been really responsive to that. Let's just be honest. Our people in Fargo have had a little more luck, and they've been out very active in communicating to the business community, advocating for immigrants, and the business community is very supportive of that. They're getting on radio stations and being out in the public, and in a community of representatives who basically haven't been supportive of immigration. They're finding that verbally they are, legislatively they aren't, and they're trying to crack that nut. We're basically sitting in the middle of people who support us every day when we write to them, but we're not really able to make a lot of progress. So if in outstate Minnesota, in places where those people might have a voice with the DHS group, that would be great, actually.
Jackie, we have a question in the audience over here.
All right, so I don't have any real good ideas, but I am sitting here thinking about this. And it somehow seems that, the problem here is that an immigrant comes in and they don't have access to the kind of expertise at this table. But in this digital world, it does somehow seem like that if there were web services available, if you're even thinking about trying to immigrate, the first thing you need to do is get in touch with a lawyer before you're 20. Here's where you can go, and before they would ever try to come here. So again, this is easy to say, harder I'm sure to do, but it does seem like maybe that if people could get in touch with information before they try to navigate the system, it would be a big help.
Okay, so I think that's a lot easier said than done. The problem is that a lot of these folks don't have access to the technology. They don't have access to internet. They're barely surviving. And so for them to be able to access this information before they come to the United States and then to be able to go online to learn about all of this, it's very complicated. And it's not possible for a lot of folks because they just don't have access to that information and they don't have access to the technology. One last thing too, navigating the system in itself is extremely complicated. Immigration law is super, super complex, and it's next to tax law, where it changes on a daily basis. It changes with executive orders, it changes with court decisions, it changes with just administrative decisions, it changes with the laws that just gets passed. Like, everything just changes. There's so many different things that happen. It could be one thing one day and something else the next day, just like what Daniel was talking about earlier with changes in administration. And so it's just so hard to stay on top of all of that and to be aware of everything.
Yeah, and I'll just add, so my family's from El Salvador, and it's hard for us to really conceptualize some of the settings that that some of these immigrants come from. So the last time I was in El Salvador was about 13 years ago now, and I went to the small town that my family was from, and they had just gotten paved roads like a year or two before. It's a town of like 2,000 people in El Salvador. They were getting cell phones, so they were getting that kind of technology, but they just don't have the infrastructure that we have. In El Salvador, especially up until pretty recently, a lot of kids were kind of lucky to make it, in El Salvador past like 16, 17 years. So most of the boys fled because of the problem with gangs. So they're coming here as children. If they stayed past that age, they were either being recruited by a gang or being, having involvement with law enforcement or being killed. So if that's your situation and you don't have ready access to internet and you got paved roads 10 to 15 years ago, it's an experience that's really difficult for us to really connect with. And then some applications you just don't qualify for. So like the asylum contemplates that. If you are fleeing your government, you can't go to your government and ask them to provide you internet access to allow you to flee them, right? So asylum applications, really, you have to be in the United States to file your asylum application. And to get here, you can, if you're lucky, you can come in with a visa, but once you're in the United States, that's when you can file your asylum application. So that's really when you would need to learn it. So it's very difficult. I would love that if that was an option. For some people it is. For some people, just their reality is so far removed from what we kind of take for granted. So that can make it difficult to really understand that. So I just wanted to give the example of where my family is from. Oh, and there's a lot of fake information out there. Yeah, and so if you are not, I hear, I have so many people come in and say, well, this lawyer on TikTok said X, Y, Z. And that's a fun way to start the conversation. So what am I keying off of here? So we expect a fair bit of literacy, if that's kind of the standard, right? And there's a lot of misinformation out there. So that's another thing. There are also people who provide low-cost services that often portray themselves as paralegals or have fake attorney licenses, and I've seen a lot of people come in also trying to clean up a case that a fake lawyer completely destroyed for them. So there are a lot of obstacles, for these communities.
Hi, good evening. I'm Cynthia. I'm second generation immigrant. I actually wanted to come back to that question regarding what you can do to the community. I'm for the community, I should say. I actually had a firsthand experience of one of my best friend's husbands just got removed, and luckily, her children are all over the age of 15. I can't even think of the word. I had the privilege to care for her child as I was raising my children, and finally got myself into college. I am now going for my bachelor's degree, and with that knowledge, I'm able to help her navigate simple tasks like going on the internet, like basically making those phone calls and acting like I'm a white person. And at the end of the day, I'm literally just being, and she calls me her lawyer, which I tell her that I don't want to be called, but I appreciate that I'm in her life and that she's able to have me as an American citizen in Minnesota that, you know, I love with all my heart. I've had the opportunity to move to California, and I said, heck no. And so when I said I'm gonna stay here, I have a calling, and just with her experience, it's pushing me to want to do something with immigration. And just wrapping back with that, if you do come across somebody, I'm not saying do it, you know, like it just pulls at your heart to be able to at least use your language to get through to that barrier. I was able to go in to the immigration, and I went in, like one of you guys said up there, I went in with my passport. I had just prepped a few years ago, me and my children, without knowing where this immigration or where this situation was gonna go. All my kids have their passports ready, both. You know, the little folder and the little ID. I walked into the immigration, and the first thing they said was, I need to see an ID, and I proudly pulled that out. About 4 immigration officers came out, and I don't know what their intentions were, but I felt that if I didn't have that, they were gonna make a move, and I just felt it, and I said, I'm so glad I have this, but at the same time, that's not what's happening with our community. That is not what's happening, and I just feel like just being there for her has given her the ability to say, okay, I'm gonna stay here, because I don't think if I would be on her and constantly with her, she would have already taken off, and she would have to leave her kids, because her kids are American citizens, and they wouldn't want to go to that country. They wouldn't want to follow her. They're gonna say, no, I have to stay here, and they're gonna protest. And so, I mean, I think it may be or may not be correct what I'm doing, because I will make phone calls, and I will get through, like, I will act like I know the system, and I've had times where they bend over backwards when I speak to them, and I don't know. It's just what I've done with my community, and I will continue to do it as far as God says to do it.
Hi, I'm Jim. We've touched a lot on undocumented, but there are stories out there about people with legal residency, green cards, visas, that have minor convictions in the past. Wondering if anyone can touch on what's happening to people that are here legally but have minor convictions.
So anyone that is not a U.S. citizen is subject to immigration law, and that's what a lot of folks don't understand, is that if you're not a U.S. citizen, if you're a permanent resident, which means you have a green card in the United States, certain convictions will make you removable. And so a crime, a theft offense, a conviction for a theft offense, or an assault, something like that, under the immigration law, that's considered a crime involving moral turpitude. 2 of those at any time after entry would make someone removable. Not only does it make you removable, you would be also subject to mandatory detention. And so what that means is that you could be held in immigration custody until your case ends. More serious offenses would be considered aggravated felony. So a crime of violence in which a term of imprisonment of 365 days would make you removable, and it would also subject you to mandatory detention. A crime of a controlled substance violation. And so under the immigration law, or under the federal statute, marijuana conviction is still a controlled substance. And so even though it's legal in many states, if there was an admission to a use of marijuana, or if you were charged and convicted of marijuana possession. And so like in Minnesota, usually it's just a ticket. You pay the ticket, that's now a guilty, you now have a guilty plea, essentially it's a conviction, and so then for immigration purposes, you now have a controlled substance violation. And so that would also make someone removable and also subject to mandatory detention. And so that isn't just for folks that are undocumented. For those that have permanent residency, that's a removable offense. One conviction of a controlled substance violation is removable.
Whether it's fair that we wouldn't do something in that process to maybe avoid that conviction and do something else that would get to accountability and do right by the person that was harmed. So having a collateral consequences policy or something like that that informs the prosecutorial function is really important. Another thing is being open to working with lawyers, like in the immigration law community, to revisit past cases to see if there's ways in which things through the post-conviction process can be changed. Because what I see oftentimes is somebody who was convicted a long time ago, and they've made amends for whatever they did, might be property damage from a long time ago, but because of what's happening now, they find themselves in the context of being removed from this country. And it's just simply not fair. That's not equity. We have to meet people where they're at, because they've already served their consequence. They've done their time. They've done whatever we've asked them to do, and they've been law-abiding ever since. And so we have a lot of those heartbreaking situations. Just recently we had a case involving a man who was subject to deportation. He's my age. He came here at 7 years of age from Costa Rica. He was adopted by a white family in St. Paul, but the parents never just got his citizenship. They just missed that. And because of an old conviction, he was subjected to potentially being removed. And so we took some extraordinary measures to avoid that. And gratefully, in that case, the police officer was the victim, and he agreed to that change, which I thought was really great.
I'm wondering if anyone up there might have a dollar figure as to how much undocumented workers, green card holders, asylum holders pay into our tax base. Sales tax, Social Security, property tax. Does anyone know of how much that is? Maybe just in the state even.
Not sure, but you raise a point that we have not talked about, which is the economic contributions of the folks you're talking about. And it's huge, as I've seen the figures. I don't have them offhand either. Anybody in the audience know?
Okay, my name is John Schrager, and 3 years ago I knew nothing about the immigration system. I'm a local attorney here in White Bear Lake. First off, I want to thank all of you for being here, because it's a tremendous shot in the arm. 3 years ago I answered a call from my Rotary Club to care about immigrants, and since then we started sponsoring my wife and a few others, Ukrainians. And so I'm connected to about 54 sponsors of Ukrainians throughout the Twin Cities, representing multiple families at each sponsor group, and they invited them to the United States legally. They followed all of the rules. So of that group, I'm very connected to. I'm also a volunteer attorney with the Advocates for Human Rights for a gentleman from the Gambia who is seeking asylum in the United States. So I want to say thank you for being here. My question is about ICE, and I hear about the funding that is coming to ICE, and I am personally connected to these immigrants who are, as Rick said, frightened to leave their house. They came here legally, and now they do not have legal status, even though they put their applications in February and March. They just haven't been processed. So they've done everything right. So my question is about some of the activities that ICE is doing, changing license plates I hear about, wearing masks, surging, the amount of money that's going to come in, the amount of hiring that's going to come in. And if anything can be done, I'm very grateful that we're here in Minnesota. And thank you, Mr. Choi, for all that you have done and all that you have said specifically. But what can we do as Minnesotans and in our government to return us to the type of America where law enforcement people would show themselves, and I would be proud that they are representing all of us? What can we do?
So, with this funding, last week, Kristi Noem visited Minnesota to, disparage some of the local cooperation or lack thereof that she's getting here. But in that, in her comments, she indicated that, the Twin Cities was going to start to see a larger inflection of ICE officers working here. Obviously, we already have that. That is already happening in our state, in our community, and we've seen it in the Twin Cities. We've seen it in Southwest Minnesota. Sort of increased activities. A lot of times going on at job sites. We've spoken to, interviewed people who have been detained at job sites. Many of these people are people who were going through some sort of legal process. I mean, there are some people who, yes, never had any kind of thing, but a lot of people had, a legal process that they were going through, but because maybe when they first came to the United States, they crossed the border in an unsanctioned way and then immediately turned themselves into Customs and Border Patrol. That was a really common practice for a lot of the Biden administration. And if you meet people from Central America, places like Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and even South America, Ecuador, and whatnot, you'll meet a lot of people who came in this way. And these people are being detained if ICE goes to these job sites, even if they have a perfectly legal pending operation. So I think what Secretary Noem said in her comments last week is that we are going to start seeing more and more ICE activity in our state. And whether that manifests itself in the way that people may have seen news clips of from like Chicago or Portland, we don't exactly know yet. And as for what people are doing about that, we've interviewed people who are attempting to organize some sort of community alert system or whatnot, where you're basically just, if you see these agents operating in your neighborhood, whatnot, maybe you post about it online, or even call your neighbors or whatnot and encourage people to stay inside if they're worried about being picked up or that sort of thing. Whether that in theory that shouldn't be a crime or anything like that, but so there are people who are organizing on those lines in Minnesota. I know there's a number of different formal and informal groups who are talking about that, and that can be as simple as chatting with your neighbors or going on the dreaded Nextdoor website. But that sort of thing, that is an avenue for people. But with that increase in funding, they're hiring very fast. There's been really credible reporting about the training standards and or lack thereof. I think there's a lot of credible reporting about how others in federal law enforcement view people who are, being signed on to ICE, HSI operations. So, however fast it takes to onboard those people and deploy them out to different places, I think it's safe to say we'll see more and more of that in our state.
Rick talked about the red cards, and one of the things that I've been told is that we all need to know our rights. That it's not just immigrants who need to know their rights, but we need to know our rights also, and make sure that we can operate in situations maybe where we see things. We know what we can do. One of the things I've always heard is pull out your phone and take pictures of what's going on. Anything else over there? Okay. Anybody? Who have we left out? Oh, there's someone back there, Lisa.
I just wanted to, first of all, really thank you for what you said before about how you're helping your best friend's husband and her family. That we too, as white people, need to befriend people who are not like us and from other communities, and make calls for them and help them in situations. I have friends from other communities who, like for housing issues or police issues or other government issues, they have run into problems where they aren't listened to or taken seriously, and they'll call me for help, and I'll say, okay, I'll make the call. And I am treated extremely differently as a white person who speaks English very well. I don't have an accent. I have a plain Jane name. All those things can be taken stereotypically in a racist way. And if we can just befriend people and be kind to them and help them, it can make a huge difference in how outcomes come in their life. And so I just want to say that. And then I had one question. I was just wondering, are immigration courts required to provide interpreters for people?
There are supposed to be interpreters at immigration court. Are there always interpreters at immigration court? All right. One last question, if anybody has a burning one that they would like to ask, and then right there.
Yep.
Oh, you got one.
Hi. Given all of the intimidation tactics that are underway right now in the immigration situation in this area, and the importance of people getting active voting for local government, so that can just roll up and start making the change that we're looking to have made, how much of a deterrent do you think all of these intimidation tactics are going to make on we don't have a big immigrant population in White Bear Lake, but in the surrounding areas, Minnesota, etc. And secondly, what can white people do to help that situation so that as many people as possible can get out to vote this coming Tuesday? Not long. Is that the intimidation will suppress the vote? So I'm curious if you guys who are working in this actually believe that as well, because there's so much fake news, who knows, right?
Would someone like to answer that about voting? Of course, I'm with the League of Women Voters, so of course I want everybody to vote, and I want everybody to encourage everybody to vote. There's not too much to vote for this year for some of us. Some of us have essentially nothing on the ballot. Others have like one or two questions. But even then, we have to go and give voice to our thoughts. Any thoughts about intimidation? Have you seen any instances where people who can vote feel they won't vote because they feel intimidated? I think that 2026, of course, is going to be able to answer more of your questions, Jean, I think, as there are many, many more things for which people will need to pay attention, learn about, and inform themselves before they vote, and bring a friend to vote. There's one last question over here.
Am I allowed to ask a question? Just a quick question for Corleen. Corleen, you were talking earlier about the path to citizenship, and that only certain immigrants were on that path, and the main category being those with green cards. How long typically does it take a person to get a green card?
So getting a green card, it's going to depend on your status, essentially how you are eligible for the green card. So some people are eligible, for example, for permanent residency because they're a refugee, they're an asylee, they got petition from a family member, and that family member basically requested to bring them to the U.S. So that process of becoming a permanent resident could be a few years. It could be essentially, decades, depending on when you started that process. So it really depends on kind of where you started your journey, essentially. And some people, as we've also mentioned, are not on a path to citizenship. We've talked about a lot of the Ukrainian folks, some of the Afghans, DACA recipients, for example. So some people are either undocumented or they just have a work authorization. A lot of some of the folks in our Hmong community, for example, they've they just have that work authorization that they're eligible, hopefully, to reapply for, but that's not giving them a path to a green card or essentially to citizenship.
Someone was smart enough to pull out a phone and do a little Googling and tells us that there's $200 million in state and local taxes come from immigrants in Minnesota. I have that right? I think. Okay, thank you. All right. It's clear that rules and regulations change all the time. I don't know how you ever keep up with all of that. And you're all doing amazing work. And that work must create a lot of emotions for you. Frustration, exhaustion, confusion, sadness, fear, and hopefully every once in a while when things go right, some joy in knowing that some things have gone right. I'm going to ask you each one last question, one question to ask each of you to answer, and that is, of everything that we've discussed this evening, what do you hope people bring home with them when they leave us tonight? And Rick, I'll start with you.
I think I already talked about the fact that let's listen before we judge when we see people in the community who might be different than us. And they may or may not be immigrants, but that's part of the process. And there are actions that we can take. And actually, I don't know if we want to talk about this now or not. Okay, later or now? Okay, at least I'm going to talk about that. But maybe there's a group of people who can take one thing that they'd like to advocate for and start pulling forward on that. The pathway to citizenship does not exist for Ukrainians unless they have a different status. Neither does it exist for the Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Afghanistan people. So they don't have a pathway. They were here temporarily at our invitation.
I would say that a lot of the clients that we work with every day at International Institute, they're very resilient. They're very, despite all of the struggles, they're very grateful for being here, and they're very resilient, and, they just always appreciate our support in any way that we can give it to them.
Thank you so much. I would say, one thing that I've noticed just, from being a reporter, from, being a person, something that Daniel said earlier that stuck with me. A few years ago, I was lucky enough to be doing a lot of traveling in South America, and I spent a month in Colombia near the Venezuelan border volunteering with a group that was helping what they call caminantes, people who were crossing over from Venezuela to Colombia, and many of them spread out throughout South America, more stable countries there, up to Mexico, and many had the ultimate goal of coming to the U.S. And I think for a lot of those people who make that sort of journey, they've gone through a lot, and they've risked a lot to come here, and it's kind of a lot of things are worth it to them just to have a shot to have a decent job for a couple years, or a good place to live for a couple years, or a stable environment for their kids for however long it may be. And so I think a lot of times we look at like the ultimate goal of people going through this process, but there are many small steps along the way that are big deals and big like moments of relief for those people who are making that journey. And that's one thing to think about. The other thing would be to read sahanjournal.com. You can sign up for our newsletters. Our website is free, and it does not have the weird spammy ads that you see on other websites either. So.
Well, some days it can be so discouraging to think about where we are right now and what we're talking about. I think we've fallen so far in terms of the rule of law in this country and the values that I see kind of percolating in terms of what is America. And it's really sad. But I have to remind myself, and we have to remind ourselves, that this country belongs to us, the people who show up. And so what's happening tonight is actually you're making it normal to actually want to believe in a country that welcomes immigrants and refugees from other places. That's the basis of America. You're making it normal to say that we need to gather in community and to change these norms, and I want to figure out what I can do to help. If we could just get some more of this and some more conversations generated and just paying attention more to all the things that we're losing right now as a country, and just believe in ourselves that we can bring this back together. I know that we can, because this country is the greatest country in the planet, but right now we're not showing it. But together, we're going to get there.
Having conversations like this is a start for us to all just understand what is happening, what is going on, and it's important to continue to show up. And if for any reason there are things that we can't do to personally help, there's a lot of nonprofits that are doing a lot of very great work in the community. And so helping to fund that is also very important. Nonprofits like the Advocates for Human Rights. I sit on the board of the American Civil Liberties Union. I'm also the board chair, as well as the board chair of Minnesota Aid. And so there's a lot of nonprofits that's out there doing great work. And so if we're not able to do stuff to help, fund the nonprofits that are.
Well, I don't need to talk now. Thank you. What comes to mind when we're thinking about just how discouraging, as John said, how discouraging things are, I get to look at our amazing volunteers. And we had more than 1,600 people join us last year in our work. So thank you all for coming here tonight to learn more. And if you know of someone who's in the community and needs an attorney, help them find one, because you've heard just how complicated the system is and how critical it is to talk to an attorney sooner rather than later. So thank you.
And I guess just the takeaway for me from tonight, we've talked about a lot of technical things, but I suppose I'm a big fan of having empathy for people, and that's kept me going through my career, initially as a social worker and now as an attorney. And so I guess just focus on the humanity of the people that we're doing this for, because even clients who I see who don't have good claims, for example, there are people who come who just their case of asylum would be really, really difficult to win. That exists. But almost universally, they are scared for their children's lives. They want a better future for their children. And they put their lives on the line to try to get that better future for their family and for their kids. And so I suppose just as we're looking at what we can do, and if we're getting discouraged, I suppose I would ask us to think about, like, what would you do to save your child's life? Because that's what a lot of these people are having to grapple with. So it can be tempting to say, well, you did something illegal, but I guess how illegal would you be willing to behave? How illegally would you be willing to behave to save your child's life? That's kind of the thought for a lot of the people that we're working with. And then what kind of help would you want from the community you arrive in if you got your child here and are hoping for a better future? So I suppose I would just encourage us to have empathy for all the people that we're working with as we struggle through what we're going to be struggling through for a few years here.
Thank you. Thank you for all that you do. We are so grateful. Thank you for coming. Lisa's going to take a few minutes.
As Jackie said, thank you everyone for coming and for your great questions and for your participation tonight. We're sorry that we couldn't get to every question, but if you have unanswered questions, please leave the note cards on your tables. We'll collect them, and we'll make every effort to try and answer them in the coming weeks on our Many Faces website. If you're looking, and obviously you are, for a way to get more involved, or for information about what you can do, as was mentioned earlier, there's a handout in the back on the table. It looks like this, and that will, it's just with suggestions of things you can do at the federal, state, and local levels. And it was prepared by the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis by Carrie Hong. Thank you to the City of Vadnais Heights for making this wonderful commons available. And to Katie Everett, you've seen her running around all night with trying to fix everything, and she's done such a great job. We could not have done this without her. And finally, to our panelists, thank you for giving us your time and your expertise this evening. We know how incredibly busy you are these days, and this was one more thing on your plate. Thank you for everything you do. Good night, everyone, and safe travels home.